Earth Day. And the most important thing we have to grasp on Earth Day is not the bit about sex, intrigued though I know you are. The most important thing we have to somehow grasp is the part about single. It's a single planet, just one. For all the fun that we're having looking through the heavens for what Star Trek called the Class M planets, the ones we can stand on, breathe on, live on without extraordinary means, we keep forgetting that the most fictitious part of Star Trek was not the Class M planets, but that warp drive that got them there. As far as we know, it is scientifically impossible, no matter what our technological capabilities. Anyway, it's all our little planet can do to keep a few people on an orbiting space station at the moment. So we ruined this planet, we fouled our own nest, made our own bed. There's no place else to go. It's a single planet. And what does sex have to do with that? Well, quite a lot, actually. For instance, population numbers and density have a lot to do with global warming and global degradation. At current rates, the continent of Africa, for instance, already the poorest in the world, will add more than 1 billion people in the next 50 years. Sex has everything to do with that problem, though not much to do with its solution. And on the other hand, those 1 billion new Africans would, at current rates, have no more impact on global warming than the mere 114 million new Americans the next 50 years is expected to bring. That's because we Americans use so much stuff and burn so much fuel to support our standard of living, and because we do it in such an extremely wasteful way. Europeans have a very high standard of living too, but with half the impact on the planet. There are lots of reasons for that, social, geographical, and historical. My point is that a good life and an ecologically responsible life and an economically responsible life are not opposites. So I could go into all the stuff you've heard before, no doubt. Ride your bike. I noticed a few people rode their bikes this morning. Congratulations. And I know you're all going to ride your bikes next week, right? Okay. Eat less meat. Own the smallest car you possibly can. Put on a sweater in the winter and take off your jacket and tie in the summer. You know the drill. And many of you do those things. I strongly suspect that there are more hybrids and smart cars per capita in the UU parking lot than in any other church in town. So, this morning we'll skip all the stuff and talk about sex. First, a quick swing through the things I think you probably already know about sex and the single planet. That in the less developed world, the high birth rate is the single greatest danger to the planet's ecology. And we actually know a very effective solution to this problem: educate girls and empower women. In the developing world, you see, the more years of schooling a girl has, the fewer children she is likely to bear when she is grown. She will avail herself both of birth control methods, and she will have economic options besides dependency on her husband, and she will want fewer children and prevail upon her husband to accept a smaller family, because raising more children than you can afford is a heartbreaking experience. More years of schooling girls get in the developing world, the smaller the population pressures on our single planet. Puts our contribution to the schooling of UU kids in Kenya in a larger light, doesn't it? If my math is correct, the people of this congregation have helped 13 girls stay in school for 2 years now. One of them is now off to college. We've helped 13 boys, too, 2 of whom are now off to college as well. There's a lot less study of the effect of men's educational levels on population growth, but it seems likely to me that a more educated a boy is, the more likely he is to desire the smaller family that he can afford, too. Sex in the single planet? In the developing world, it boils down to fairly easy, fairly inexpensive, humane interventions, which help people do exactly what they wanted to do in the first place, which is to plan their parenthood and enjoy the benefits of a smaller family. Here in America, we could do a lot more to assist that process for a very modest expenditure of resources, but we lack the political will. And the tangled reasons that we lack the political will are almost uniquely our American problem with sex. And in the developed world, especially so our problems with sex make a big problem in the developed world for our planet. I mean by the word sex, both our relationship to our own bodies, our sexuality, and sex as in the power relationship between the sexes, more properly called genders, but, well, gender in the single planet just didn't have quite the same ring. Anyway, these two things, sexes in sexuality and sexes in gender, are entwined in more than our language. Just think about the news lately. That war on women that some have accused Republican legislators of waging isn't actually a war on women, and Republicans are right, if a bit disingenuous, to say so. It's really a war on sexuality, not a war on women. It's just that the way the Republicans are waging it at the moment, all of its wages are going to be paid by women. It's not even really a war on all sex, actually, though, again, the wages of that war will be to make all heterosexual sex, even between husband and wife, more expensive, more fraught, and more possibly returning some couples to the days when husbands were banished to the couch to prevent another pregnancy, an outcome which is probably not family-friendly. But according to conservative thinking, non-marital sex is both wrong and damaging to the social order, and people who engage in it should not be encouraged in any way, such as by adding birth control measures to the health insurance mandate or permitting abortion in case of birth control failure. The laws of the land being what they are, which don't permit distinguishing between married couples and non-married couples. Republicans are okay with disabling the sexual lives of married people in order to achieve their goal of social purity and maybe less non-marital sex, although actually that's probably doubtful. Most Americans have no real problems with premarital sex between committed partners, and the economics-driven need for late marriage pretty much clinches the deal. Young adult bodies are driven towards each other. Evolution made it that way for all those years in which humans were the endangered species on the planet. The fact that heterosexual women will pay the lion's share of the price for this minority-driven neo-Puritanism is considered at best unavoidable collateral damage, and at worst is the double standard, which does actually seem to attend all denegrations of human sexuality. As far as I know, in every society in which sexuality is considered a problematic part of human nature, it's considered a problem for men to manage, but is a stain on women's very humanity. From burqas to the she was asking for it Puritanism and the double standard go hand in hand everywhere. Well, I have a certain respect, actually, for some traditional values about family, but I have no respect for injustice of the double standard. And the fact of the matter is that human beings have actually never confined sex to marriage, that the majority of people who use birth control and a significant percentage of those who want abortions are married, and the double standard is an injustice of patriarchy upon which the most miserable human oppressions, short of slavery, are based. So the war on women is a sort of a war on women, but it really is much deeper than that. It's a war on sex. To claim that birth control is some sort of an extra frill in human life, which the public ought not to have to pay for, is to say, in effect, either that unlimited childbearing is medically and socially okay, which only a fringe claims, or that sex itself is just a little extra frill in human life, and the ability of anyone of fertile age to engage in it freely is the moral equivalent of, say, wanting to look younger than you are through cosmetic surgery, another thing not covered by insurance. If the logical conclusions of this particular war were drawn out, they would be a non-starter for those desiring to be elected to political office. So they're not being stated, but they need to be. Uncomfortable as most of us are talking about sex in public, the obvious needs to be stated. Limiting access to birth control is a war on sex, not just on premarital sex and extramarital sex, but on the sexual lives of all young and middle-aged heterosexual people, married or not, on the planet. Which doesn't actually need couples, especially American couples, to have more children than they want to raise. Now, there actually is a little bit more, excuse me, there is actually a little more, I'm having a hard time with my mouth today. There is more than a little war on women going on here. The Rush Limbaugh diatribe exposed the truly dark underside of gender and sexual conservatism and the links between them in terms so, well, graphic that the whole of his 3-day screed was not widely reported because it was definitely not family fare. He's apparently been forgiven for treating all of America to his fairly explicit sexual fantasies. At least for the moment, his show has gone on with most of its audiences, stations, and advertisers now that the dust has settled. Talk about a double standard. And no one has suggested taking Viagra, etc., off the insurance list, although some have protested that Viagra is a drug which corrects a medical problem, and that's different from birth control pills, which interfere with a medically natural function. But most of this is sophistry, rationalizations which come after the heart has made up its mind. But once again, you see, wars on sex and wars on women go together for some reason. I'm more of a fan of many traditional values than the average UU, or probably the average liberal for that matter, and I'm going to talk about that next month. But like most Americans, including most conservative Americans, I have just not noticed that premarital sex is all that damaging to family or social stability. Premarital sex has always been a part of the human environment. For much of Western history, this was handled by permitting sex during the engagement period. Yes, even the Catholic Church allowed that for many, many, many years. But the fact of the matter is that most of our human ancestors were much less uptight about sex than we are. The Pauline abhorrence of body and sexuality, which became a part of the DNA of Christianity, was a peculiarity of its own. He took the worst of Platonic mind and body split and merged it with probably his own personal angst about his body and whatever ailment he once wrote of as the thorn in his flesh. The Platonic mind-body split was contrary to the Jewish worldview. But Plato's point was to glorify the mind rather than specifically to denigrate the body or its sexuality. That was problematic enough. But Paul's take on the split was to treat the body as an anathema to the real human life. This was an anathema to his Jewish heritage, which clearly teaches that God made our bodies, and that's good. Sex in Jewish law is considered a good and necessary part of a married life, and its pleasure is a special gift to both men and women, so special that a roll in the marital hay is considered a particularly commendable part of a good Sabbath. We who are of the Christian tradition, and that's all of us, no matter what our beliefs are, because although there is no official religion in the U.S., Christianity, for better or for worse, is an inescapable part of our social DNA. We who are of the Christian tradition must really struggle to think of our bodies and our sexuality as wonderful and to be easy about their expression. And that's one reason our planet is in such trouble. When mind and body are split off, you see, as Plato did, the honors are all given to the mind, whose job then is to master the body and conquer nature and rule over it, as a king might. The dumb beasts are seen as mere tools. The mindless forests then are mere resources, all to be used up and manipulated by the glorious rational mind, which is always seen as the most glorious and the most rational in its male incarnation, because unfortunately women have that messy but important business of child rearing and bearing to take care of, and that keeps them rather closer to the birds and the bees. But the result of this split is what's important. Rational personhood, the splitting from the rest of nature, is the denigration of the environment, and in the end, a headlong rush into global warming, which, this is unstated but absolutely clear to me, the rich expect to survive because they will have amassed enough capital in the run-up, that is now, to manufacture some kind of existence for themselves that they imagine will be comfortable on high ground. But what a survival it will be, and how much lost. There's little that is more dangerous to the single planet than this mind-body split, because it always becomes a mind-nature split, and nature always loses, and so do women. Furthermore, on the individual level, if you're uncomfortable with your sexuality, you're uncomfortable with your body. And if you're uncomfortable with your body, you can only manage that in a few different ways. You can work on managing it better, that problematic body, making it more beautiful, stronger, dress it better, and so on and so forth, and all of those things make you a consumer. Right? A person who's dissatisfied with his or her body is, by definition, a consumer of gym memberships, whey powder, cosmetics, the perfect bathing suit. There is no cure for a bad hair day that does not require spending money. And really, can you imagine having such impossible standards for your hair that not meeting them would make the miracle of a new day bad? And all this splitting of mind and body, person and earth, nature and human nature, it's all bad science as well as bad for the planet. The fact is that there is no mind without body, and what happens to bodies deeply affects our minds and our hearts. Nor do those minds and bodies exist without other minds and bodies, and none exist well without a healthy ecology, sunlight, nutrition that comes from food grown in the ground, relationships which nourish in many ways, including, when appropriate, sexually. The fact is, we are not like kings on the universal heap, set apart to rule from above with our glorious minds, but rather a part of the beating heart of the universe, embedded and embodied, sexuality and all. And that makes the most important story that we can tell on Earth Day, the wondrous story of the beginning. Here's the story. It comes to us from astronomy and physics. It's the message of modern science and ancient faiths. It's not new to us. We tell it regularly within our worship service. Perhaps now, though, you will hear it with new ears. In the beginning, there was sudden light. It was big and it was everywhere, though it did not go bang because there was no universe to carry sound waves and no one to hear it. So no bang, just a big, unutterably silent light. There was nowhere before the light. There was no before the light. The beginning of space and time came with the light. You can still see that light. It burned for 1,000,000 years, and it was so large that the photons from its edges are just now reaching us back in the middle. Everything that is came into being with that light. And that means everything is related. Your body, my body, our amazing minds, Mars, Earth, the most distant stars, it's all a part of that first cosmic light. Our ancestry stretches back through the life forms to the stars. This universe is a single, multiformed, unfolding process of matter, life, intelligence, spirit, all transcending itself and creating new forms in due time. The cosmic light created galaxies, billions of them, each with billions of stars. The stars created planets. At least one star created a planet, not too big, not too small, not too solid, not too gassy, not too hot, not too cold. And that planet continued the creating. Mountains, seas, atmospheres, continents, life, plants, animals, human. Life continued creating, ever more complex, ever more aware, ever more self-directed. Now, the life on the planet is shaping the planet as well as itself and its future. And it's our responsibility to continue that in beauty.